Hello, everyone. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties from yesterday. Unfortunately, I had forgotten to turn the microphone on, which led to not getting any audio in the recording. So redoing the recording here so that you can catch up on the material. Don't forget that the next exam is on Tuesday. That's April 5th. So make sure to be preparing for that. If you have any questions, feel free to get in contact with me about that. Don't forget as well that the last of the reflective essay is due on April 14th. So make sure to be keeping up with that and in keeping up with all of the reading quizzes that are left up through quiz 23. Just realized that I had not put up quiz 23, so it is now available. That's the last one, so it's not due until a couple of weeks. But I just wanted to remind you that you need to be keeping up with the reading quizzes as we finish through this semester. Today we are focusing on a slightly different slightly different approach. A lot of the religions we've been looking at so far have a very long history, at least several centuries, if not several millennia, in the case of several of these. Today, however, we're focusing on groups that predominantly have developed within the past century or so, from the 19th century on. And from a scholarly standpoint, these groups are often referred to as new religious movements. To suggest that these are groups that have recently developed. But it does also remind us that with respect to using the term new religious movement, that we're looking at something that is a little difficult when it comes to naming. And there are a lot of things tied up with the naming of this phenomenon of these movements that have developed recently, some of them connected with established religions, some of them not. Frequently, a lot of these groups are often termed cults, especially if they don't have any sort of antiquity to them. Usually, the term cult is a pejorative. It's not meant to be a positive term. It's a reflection of a judgment of a specific religious movement, and that there's usually something insidious or very concerning about a group that gets named a cult. And usually the term is meant to indicate that this group that we're talking about requires some sort of extreme commitment. That could be breaking ties with friends and family, maybe even leaving a job, maybe giving up all possessions, maybe going to live in a specific place with the other members of the group. But that idea of extreme commitment, usually to a very charismatic leader who is to be unquestioningly obeyed. And so usually when people use the term cult, that's the kind of group that they're talking about. Frequently people also talk about members who are a part of such groups as being brainwashed. The assumption is that people who join such movements are not thinking rationally. If they were, they would leave the movement, that somehow they have been indoctrinated or manipulated to see things, see life the way that the leader or the group wants them to see it, that they somehow have lost a realistic view of the world and of the group. And so often family members who are on the outside, right, looking in, here's your family member or your friend that's joined such a group, want to see this brainwashing removed, and so you'll hear of people, of even groups that are dedicated to deprogramming, deprogramming people who have been members of cults. Essentially, the idea is that certain psychological experts, and frequently people will identify themselves as such, right? They're an expert in deprogramming or an expert in cults. The idea is that the cult or the leader has programmed them to see things a certain way. They have to be deprogrammed. And so in order to leave the cult, they have to have this psychological process that will help them see things with the assumption that they'll see things as they really are, where the cult doesn't see things as they really are, is the assumption. All of these terms have some problems to them because they are imprecise. It's easy to look at groups and from the outside and misunderstand what's going on. This has even happened in the history of Christianity at various times and with various movements. So, you know, it's imprecise. What is a cult? In many respects, a lot of religious movements, a lot of churches have charismatic leaders, and so, you know, that's not in itself something to make something a cult. You know, it ignores the fact that sometimes people do rationally choose to belong to some sort of group like this. Even though many other people, and probably most of us, would say, you know, why would you join a group like that? Well, you see what's happening. You know, maybe they have made the rational decision to do that. You know, and certainly maybe it's not based on all facts, or maybe they're ignoring some things, but all of us do those kind of things. And so, you know, we got to be careful with how we throw some of this terminology around. And furthermore, you know, in thinking about this idea of brainwashing, you know, the idea is that they have been made to think or see the world around them as being a certain way, which, you know, should cause us to stop and ask, is mainstream culture brainwashed? I mean, essentially, that marketing relies on the idea of you know, people engaging in ways of thinking and seeing. And furthermore, in some sense, all religious groups engage in indoctrination and socialization. You know, you have to be, if you're joining a group, whether as a child growing up in it or as an outsider becoming an insider, you have to be indoctrinated. You have to learn, you know, what is expected, what the teachings are. You have to be socialized into the group, what actions are appropriate, what aren't. You know, certainly, having said all that, I don't mean to suggest that we shouldn't question the legitimacy of certain groups. I don't think that we shouldn't be concerned with the behaviors and practices. Just to suggest that, you know, we need to be careful how we throw around some of these terms before we have all the facts, before we understand what's going on. And so using the term cult may or may not be something that you know, that is useful in thinking about some movements. But in thinking about a cult from a sociological standpoint, it's important to kind of situate cults in contrast to some other types of nomenclature with respect to religious groups. And so in many respects, sociologists will sometimes talk about the differences between church and sect and cult. A church, in the sociological standpoint, is a group that fits into some larger community. Now, that could be fitting into a larger community within that religion, right? So a congregation fitting into the universal church. You know, you might think that within Christianity. It could be a group that's fairly integrated into society. Right? There isn't a, I mean, there's certainly this distinction between the group and the society, but not a great disjuncture, not something, a radical separation like some other groups. Many of these groups are also, that would be termed churches by the sociological standpoint, would be in, traditions that have been around for a while, they're well established. Another type of religious group is the sect. The sect is usually a break-off group from a larger tradition, develops within a tradition, but has rejected something within that tradition or within that society or community and gone in a different direction. These groups tend to be newer because they break off within established traditions. They also tend to emphasize separation, look at the either the group that they've broken off from or society as a whole as being opposed to their beliefs. There can be a notion of radical separation in the sense of, you know, let's say a sect within Christianity would say, you know, that the universal church at large is gone the wrong way, and so we don't recognize them as Christians, or you know, society is so opposed to us, we need to be separate from society. And so usually the sect is a break-off. Usually they may or may not think of themselves as having the only truth of reality or the religion, etc. The cult, however, is even further separated from society than the sect. Cults may or may not develop within established traditions. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it might be an amalgamation of traditions, right? A kind of approach where you're taking some elements of Christianity and some elements of Buddhism and some elements of some other religion, or it could be, you know, completely outside of it. Most times these groups are under the influence, the teaching of a very charismatic leader. Usually there might also be a requirement of accepting what the leader says, but and then also the idea of being marginalized, they're really separate from society. Society kind of distances themselves, and the group within it, the people within the group distance themselves as well. Within that term cult, sociologists have also broken it down into further groups. Audience cults, client cults, and then the cult movement. An audience cult is essentially a group, a development where people are connected with the teachings of a charismatic individual, but there isn't any sort of conversion required, usually very minimal commitment. You know, you're not making too much of a commitment to the leader or to a group. And usually there's some sort of buffet approach to spirituality. You can take some of the things that the leader is saying, but you can also have, you know, some of the of your own traditions or traditions, other traditions. You know, you probably think of like a lot of self-help gurus, people like Dr. Oz or somebody like that, who, yes, they want you to buy their books, but you know, as far as the commitment, it's reading the book or, you know, watching them on TV or something like that. It's not any sort of conversion or separation, you know. And if you want to be a Christian and watch Dr. Oz doesn't care about that, right? You know, something like that. A client cult requires a little bit more of a commitment. Usually there's some sort of service offered, like maybe a therapeutic service. With that, there's this kind of pay-as-you-go. Still not a, I mean, it's client cults would tend to be kind of easy to join, but also easy to leave. It would require a little bit more commitment than the audience cult. But as far as your major day-to-day life, it might not make that much of an impact. You know, and we might get into, you know, if there's a specific, maybe a weight loss plan or something like that, where the plan requires you to buy something specifically from the individual or the organization, right? This kind of, pay-as-you-go idea where, if you decide to stop doing the program, you can leave, right? And so there's not that obligation of you're stuck now, which is slightly different, of course, than the cult movement. Usually cult movements require that total commitment. You're fully converted to be a part of the faithful. And that might even require, as we've said before, this breaking of allegiances, leaving family, other types of things like that, where you're kind of giving up your old identity and adopting your new identity. And so, even to the point of living in a compound somewhere with just other believers. Also, thinking from a sociological perspective, many cults tend to fall under a broader sociological view known as revitalization movements. Revitalization movements tend to be these attempts by a individual or movement to construct a more satisfying culture. This deliberate attempt to make changes in the culture that will solve problems that exist within it. Something's wrong in the world, and so here is the means to change that. At the top, or in the origins of a revitalization movement, is the charismatic figure. Right? This is the individual who has a vision. That could be supernatural, that could be not, right? But has at least a vision of what's wrong with culture and what needs to be changed. Now, of course, it doesn't just end there. That person will then gather followers who share that vision, who want to see, that change, who believe that this charismatic figure has some sort of power or authority. Based on the claims or their experience. Again, that could be supernatural, that could be not. It could be somebody claiming, well, I've had this vision from God. It could be somebody saying, I've studied Scripture and here's some aspect of Scripture that will help us change society. The big question with revitalization movements, and really new religious movements in specific, is the question of what happens when the leader dies. In many respects, depending on how authority is routinized, and yes, routinization is a real term, depending on how that authority becomes a routine part of the life of that religious movement will kind of give us some idea as to whether it is likely to continue or not. If authority is solely bound up in the charismatic leader, the likelihood of it breaking apart upon that leader's death is very high. Right? If there's no tangible expression of that authority that continues, that could be, naming a successor, right? That this is the person that's going to lead the community. That could be leaving a group of texts, some writings that people can appeal to or study. Those kind of things routinize authority that allow movements to continue on past the death of the founder. Usually it might also require some sort of institution building as well, whether that's a board hierarchy, whether that's some sort of rituals connected with authority. There's all sorts of things that this can find expression, but unless that's become a part of that group before the death of the founder or shortly after, the likelihood is that those kind of things will disappear. The goal of the revitalization movement then, right? That next stage, right? So you have the charismatic leader who hopefully gathers disciples, who hopefully routinize authority so that it can perpetuate. The goal, of course, is to make that change. That change that was originally the problem here. Certainly, many revitalization movements never get to this point. It's very rare that this happens. In some respects, we could look at Christianity as a revitalization movement within Judaism. I think it's obviously more than that, but from a sociological standpoint, we could look at it as a way of thinking about how Christianity develops, saying, and okay, this is an example of what starts off as a revitalization movement. Jesus, while he's teaching something new, is also trying to call people back to following of God, based on the heart, right? So again, I think it's more than that as a Christian. But from a sociological standpoint, we can say, okay, it kind of fits into this pattern and is one where, there's that influence of society, great influence historically. But some of these there have been plenty of other new religious movements in the history of Western society that die off, usually within a generation or two of its leaders.